Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game Podcast with myself, Ben Scallon, and an extremely strung out, doped up Jason Osborne. Jason, did you see that video recently where that influencer, the Liver King, was threatening Joe Rogan? And you can see in one of the videos he's going on this kind of psychotic rant, and one of his pupils is this big and the other one is this big, and it just looks off. I'm not going to say you're quite liver king levels here, but
Wow.
whatever.
Lest we breeze past that, explaining why you described me as doped up and strung out. I was explaining before we went on that I just have this. My whole family were struck down with a stomach bug last week, and whereas everyone else got over it, I've been, for whatever reason, destined to suffer in the long term because I'm still, like, yeah, all over the place, suffice to say. And the doctor prescribed me some tablets, and I was looking at them yesterday, and it's an opioid apparently. So if my reaction, if Ben is saying things on this podcast and it's taking me like half a minute to respond, I just sort of stand there staring into the void. That's why. But I do hope I don't turn out like the Liver King. He used to come up on social media years ago now, and it's just in the same way that so many of these idiosyncratic but clearly unhealthy personalities sort of boom into the mainstream on social media. It didn't require a genius to tell you that he probably wasn't going to have a very happy end. I mean, he always, despite being very muscular, he always looked intensely unhealthy to my eyes.
Yeah, I don't get this whole, like, there was that trend that was going around a while back of if it fits your macros, where you can eat whatever you want as long as it is adhering to your macronutrient requirements, which means you can have a pizza every single day and still believe that you're healthy. And in fairness, some of these guys are muscular, but believe it or not, being muscular and having large pectoral muscles is not the only indicator of health. And you can still have crippling heart failure and dangerous cholesterol at the age of 30 if you live an unhealthy life, despite pumping iron in the gym every single day.
Well, I don't know whether we'll have betrayed our age somewhat, the fact that we're both approaching 30 with a reference to the Liver King, because he hasn't been around in a while. But as I say, for those people who can remember, it should come as no surprise that a guy who, what was his deal? I mean, the Liver King, he was just eating liver or something like this.
His claim was that he was natural, because again, he is like freakishly muscular, and he was claiming that he doesn't take any steroids. All he does is he eats like liver and entrails, and he's living this he's got like a big beard, and he was claiming to live the same lifestyle as like Ötzi the Iceman, basically, just meat and so on.
You skip forward to 2025 and he's like sort of crouching around his house and things like that, talking about people being out to get him, and then the next thing you know, he's being picked up in Texas because he says he's going to, he was going to either kill or attack Joe Rogan. It's like
he made some sort of overtures about Joe Rogan, fighting Joe Rogan at the very least.
Suffice to say, you're probably better off to stick with your food pyramid as is promulgated in school, despite the fact that we'll be talking about some schools' misdoings today. The food pyramid is probably a safer path to go down than the e-celeb.
Yeah, I don't know if the food pyramid, I think it's even been debunked, but I don't think it caused anybody to kill Joe Rogan, so that going for it. So with all of that said, before we move on to our topics, please, if you have not subscribed as a paying member to Gript, to do so that we can get Jason the help he so dearly needs with his fentanyl addiction. It's going to take a toll on me having to be his co-host, but we're going to see him through it. And so if you, any little helps, the way
we'll monetize every step of the development of this saga, though, including when going live on O'Connell Street on the hunt for Ben.
Yeah. And the rise and fall of one of Ireland's premier podcasting co-hosts. So with that said, today, as Jason mentioned, I'm going to steal a trick out of Jason or John and Sarah's book, because they always start by cataloging the topics that they're going to be discussing, and that's a good strategy, and we want to overtake them eventually. We haven't given up on that goal. So we're going to be discussing the state of the Irish education system, particularly the levels of propaganda that are there regarding global citizenship, as they say. We're going to be talking about Elon Musk's America Party, the fact that he's starting a new breakaway third party. What are the odds of something like that being successful? We're going to be talking about the fact that the Gardaí do not want you to see their internal anti-bias training, which is very interesting. They admit to being biased, but you can't see the resources that they're using to try and counteract that. And we had another one. What was the other one that we were going to discuss?
The other one was the one we were going to start with. We were going to roll into one hate speech updates that you've been reporting on so faithfully. And also the report yesterday that a UN panel is essentially encouraging the government to consider rerunning, I should say, the Care Referendum.
Yes, absolutely. The beloved Care Referendum. The referendum, which was, as we all remember, I don't need to do a comprehensive recap here. To make a long story short, the government wanted to remove the Constitution's unique recognition of the role of women in society and its celebration of that role, saying that women play a vital role in many households and that they should be respected and revered for this, and moreover that the state should vindicate their rights in that regard. It's a very, if we can use a word that's been tainted now, progressive passage. It's a passage that is, again, if you wanted to put it in modern parlance, feminist. It's praising women's, strength, something that they can do better than any man can, where they have a particular role to play. And so anyway, long story short, the Irish public, in their infinite wisdom, comprehensively rejected both of the proposed changes. It was the I believe it was number 1 and number 3 most comprehensively rejected referendums in the history of the state. So resounding result. And what do you know, but the United Nations and their kind of subcommittee on discrimination against women has come out and said that they are very disappointed with democracy and the will of the Irish public, and that they want the government to go back and revisit this and look at maybe an alternative wording or some kind of different strategy that will allow them to run this referendum again, hopefully with a more successful result. And so this morning I asked Taoiseach Simon Harris about it. I said, is this something that you would consider? And he very emphatically said, as I kind of suspected he would, under no circumstances are we running this again. He basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, look, the UN are entitled to their opinion, but they can shove it out their ass. Or, the opinion he said, the opinion that I'm most concerned about is the Irish public's opinion, and they've already rendered their verdict on this. It's a settled issue. We're moving on. So it won't be happening. But I thought that the gall and temerity of them to even ask was insulting. It's like if somebody asks, hey, can I sleep with your wife? Like, you're not going to say yes, but how dare you even feel comfortable enough to propose such a thing? And when you have these international globalist bodies trying to interfere in our domestic politics and what the Irish people think that our own nation's constitution should be, I find that outrageously offensive and insulting.
No, 100%. And I mean, it's no wonder so many people do veer towards, say, genuine conspiracy these days, because what you have here is essentially a committee of experts who've decided that they clearly know better than the population of this country. Because, to read some of the details on it, it's the UN's Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. What they had to say was particularly egregious. So there's something along the lines of the committee, well, not along the lines, I'm going to quote from it here. The committee recommends the state party conduct an independent evaluation of the referendum, carry out information campaigns on the negative reinforcement of Article 41.2 of gender stereotypes about women's roles in the home, and undertake inclusive public consultations to find alternative wording with a view to holding another constitutional referendum on amending Article 41.2 of the Constitution to remove the stereotypical language on the role of women in the home. Like, that is crazy. It's the UN essentially coming along, and despite the overwhelming result against it, the people were very clear in their choice on both sides of the political spectrum to get a result like that. And the UN comes along here and says, yeah, it bypasses the people and says to the government, you guys might want to consider redoing that one because it's more in line with our vision of Ireland, really. So, as I say, it's really no wonder that the elites are spoken about in such conspiratorial terms when they're so open about their disdain for the views of, the majority, I suppose, in many cases, and they're more than willing to tell the government, go back and visit that. And I would be more enthused, I suppose, by Simon Harris's rebuffing the suggestion, were it not for the fact that, he's bent in every possible direction to sort of the whims of the progressive liberal elite over the course of his time in politics, as have so many of his colleagues in Leinster House. So I don't take any particular reassurance in their batting that away for now. I think the difference between, the only difference between him refusing it now and say accepting it in the future is time. I'm not saying it's a guaranteed thing, but certainly nothing ironclad about that when he's rolled back on other principles before.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's not going to be for the foreseeable future, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years or something we could see them saying, oh, well, let's take a look at this. Maybe not Simon Harris, might be another government, another, concoction of Irish political leaders. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't dead, because we have seen referendums run again in the past, and that's not some kind of unprecedented, shocking thing. And I also think it's worth pointing out that you're talking about a United Nations organization that is there to deal with discrimination against women. And as we know, by definition, the United Nations encompasses the entire world and pretty much all countries within it. So think about how many examples of women being discriminated against there are in Afghanistan and Iraq and everywhere else that you could point to that has these sorts of major serious problems. And they are spending their time worrying about the Irish Constitution because it says that women play a very important role in the home and that we should respect and love our mothers, basically. But Irish people saying that we love and respect our mothers and wives is a serious enough problem that the UN has to get involved. That's apparently what we're to believe here.
Yeah, we clearly don't love and respect them properly, but I think it's even detrimental that they would have issued this recommendation because, again, to go back to sort of government precedent here, the current sort of batch of Irish governments love nothing more than to point to a supranational body, whether that's the UN or the EU, and saying, well, they've sort of recommended this, or well, they've encouraged that, in order to justify doing something that they want to do that's unpopular. We've seen this in relation to immigration, obviously, but I also, again, we know well that this particular referendum, I should say, was intensely popular with members of government who obviously all came out in support of it, as did, again, so many of the sort of societal elite, because I use that term because it was a fairly broad umbrella. You had a lot of columnists in support of it. You had, obviously, NGOs and civil society organizations coming out in support of it. So it's this sort of split of the moment that keeps coming up everywhere between sort of a decent mass of ordinary people and the people who occupy so many of the positions of power and influence in societies, who on that side they seem to think that they know better than everyone else what's good for societies. And so I wouldn't be surprised, I suppose I'm getting at, if they come back in the future and say, well, the UN did recommend we have a look at this one. It's just that it's still sufficiently hot and the population is sort of sufficiently triumphalist about it still that they rightly acknowledge that it would be very unpopular to broach at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, the other one that is related, which we wanted to briefly touch on, was the government has now exceeded the deadline for the updating of our hate speech legislation. As we have covered previously, the European Commission said Ireland isn't doing enough to criminalize hate speech, and you have to get on that and, fix it within 2 months, or we're going to refer you to the European Court of Justice, which comes with fines and all sorts of other penalties. And so we finally came to the end of that period where the ultimatum was going to be delivered to us, and the government opted to say, look, we're already in compliance. We've already got a hate speech law from 1989, and we'd rather not do any more on it. So now it's up to the EU to respond. So that looks like a victory. You think on its face, okay, well, they didn't comply. They kind of stood up to Europe, if you want to put it that way. But Micheál Martin, just there a couple of weeks ago, is having conversations with an LGBT NGO, and he tells them, oh yeah, we're still committed to that. As you covered, Jason, in an article recently, the integration strategy for LGBT people that was just released like a couple of weeks ago is talking about how we need to revisit hate speech laws and strengthen it when it comes to online discourse and so on. And so this was a tiny little video with like a couple of hundred views that was posted to the Fianna Fáil YouTube channel. And so it kind of flew under the radar. But essentially, I want to say in private, you can't really say a video that was posted publicly was private. But when he thinks no one is listening, when his audience is a tiny group of NGOs in a video that almost nobody sees, it was buried in a 30-minute interview, like in the latter half of it. I stumbled on it by pure fluke. So when he's having these intimate conversations with state-funded activist NGOs, he's telling them, "Oh yeah, we're gonna go for it," and blah blah blah. Don't worry, the hate speech thing hasn't been thrown out. I'm gonna chase that up with the Minister for Justice. But then they're telling the EU, "Look, we've kind of done enough. We don't think we're gonna proceed with it anymore." So I'm not even sure they've decided fully what approach they're going to take yet. And they're clearly under pressure from multiple different angles, and they're trying to figure out how they can thread the needle.
I think it was like we said on one of our initial podcasts about how this is, because we released this we started doing the podcast around the time that the new government we were waiting for their formation if they hadn't formed already. And we were saying that this would very much be a government of trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing in relation to all of these ideological issues, because there's so many different currents at play. Like, you've got obviously the big free speech push from the US. Obviously, whether you think the US is or isn't doing a good job on that, that's certainly the sort of talking point. Whereas from the EU, it's the opposite. It's very much sort of controlling, placing limits, I suppose, on speech in increasingly egregious ways in different countries. And I think that's very sort of clear. That's very clearly manifesting itself in Ireland, where, say, politicians are sort of giving one signal in one direction and another in another. And the sort of government NGO dynamic, even though we're all well familiar with it at this stage, is just endlessly puzzling to me. I mean, NGOs are obviously so dependent on government for their funding, for their direction, for their access to the levels of influence that they have. And yet, this podcast, which is hardly viewed by anyone, hosted on the Fianna Fáil channel, with the most powerful politician in the country, he's sort of there, how would I say it, sort of, appealing to them nearly and to their base, saying that, don't worry, we've committed to this, the conversation isn't over, we'll keep looking into it. It's clearly deeply unpopular in Ireland. The momentum has gone out of it entirely. So why are you, the Taoiseach, justifying yourself and your government to this group of people who are entirely dependent on you and the funding that it receives from the funding that they receive, that entire sort of sector and lobby from the government? It makes absolutely no sense to me. And despite having read about it and thought about it a lot, it's still I'm no clearer on this one. It's just a really weird dynamic.
Yeah, like the vibe in the interview was that Martin was kissing the ring. Like, you're just some no-name NGO that we've never heard of, and you're getting to meet with the Taoiseach, the leader of the Irish government, the first world country, which should be this huge opportunity. Oh my gosh, isn't this amazing? I get to sit down with him. and he is, I don't want to say groveling, that would be an overstatement, but he is trying to reassure you. And they were saying things like the NGO worker was saying things to him like, so we can expect this sooner or later then. And he was kind of saying, oh, yeah, don't worry, I'll chase that up with Jim O'Callaghan. And he was saying, okay, well, we'll watch this space. Like the subtext was kind of like, I will be holding you to this. And I expect that report on my desk by Monday. So, get to it sort of thing. Like almost telling him off. This guy's the leader of the government who pays your salary indirectly. Like you would not have a job if it wasn't for him. And you're there telling them where to get off. Like, what the hell is this? So, yeah, you're right. It's a bizarre, weird dynamic that they have going on.
It's so strange, and particularly with someone like Micheál Martin, who's so famously tetchy, as you found in so many occasions interviewing him. I mean, you make even the sort of slightest insinuation with him that he's not doing the right thing, or that sort of the direction of his party or his government isn't particularly well founded. And he sort of pulls back and he does this very sort of stuffy and uptight face, and he's like, "Oh well, no, I wouldn't know about that." And it's like he would never dream of getting that way with an NGO, it seems, or with someone who, again, is entirely dependent on the government's support and financing. So it's one of these mysteries in the Irish civil space, I suppose, this dynamic, because again, it's being plumbed over probably more now than it ever was, prior obviously to Benefact's closure. And yet it's no more understandable. I can only imagine that there's, a whole load of wheeling and dealing going on in it, off camera and behind the scenes that we're obviously unaware of at the moment.
Well, speaking of people being left completely unaware, we might move on to the Irish school system and its attempts to turn all of our children into proud global citizens who are well educated in the madrasas that are the Irish school system. I'm wondering if you could fill us in on the latest in that regard.
I could, yeah. So I wrote something during the week, and some of my favorite things to write are things that didn't necessarily come from FOIs, although I like doing that too, or things that are kind of breaking, but things that were kind of just already there, sort of just existing out in the wild, and that hadn't really been looked at least in any sort of satisfactory way, because I'd been made aware of this concept, global citizenship education, which is very much embedded in, I should say, education across the country and at multiple levels. So primary, secondary, some forms of third level education, like teacher training, for example, but then also right down to the level of like early childhood education. So it certainly has an effect on, say, but they would like to have an effect on babies and toddlers, even ahead of early childhood. So what this is, just to get the technicalities out of the way at the moment, global citizenship education is defined by Irish Aid as a lifelong educational process which aims to increase public awareness and understanding of the rapidly changing, interdependent and unequal world in which we live. By challenging stereotypes and encouraging independent thinking, global citizenship education helps people to critically explore how global justice issues interlink with their everyday lives and how they can act to build a better world. How this breaks down in practice is, for about a decade, it's been sort of well underway. So since sort of 2015, you've had this concept, global citizenship education, which the Department of Foreign Affairs, through Irish Aid, which is sort of the government's official development body, has been working to bring global citizenship education, which, as stated, is this kind of educational process which sort of aims to increase the awareness of the people it's engaging with about global issues. So all the things you might expect, like climate change, injustice, and all the ways in which that manifests itself, like gender inequality, immigration, all of these, topics of the day. And it's essentially trying to bring this to every possible forum in Ireland. So formal education in schools, higher education institutes, non-formal education, which is like community centres, youth clubs, family resource centres, old people's groups, older people's groups. And then informal education, so like in museums, libraries, exhibitions, social media. So it really is a multi-pronged initiative or approach to sort of the best way to describe it is kind of like values education. It's a multi-pronged values education where they're essentially trying to affect the views of the people they're engaging with in relation to global issues and how they relate to the local level. Now, this is obviously questionable because for a number of reasons, but one of which is that this very much draws its impetus from the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So again, the UN coming up in a negative sense here. The Sustainable Development Goals provide the international policy backdrop, I suppose, to the rollout of global citizenship education in Ireland. And the reason this is so insidious, maybe is the way to put it, for me, is because this like happens entirely outside of the consultation of parents, of families, of all the people who, you know, are responsible, I suppose, for their children, primarily responsible for their children's education. The state is rolling out this program of values education. And as far as I can tell, very, very, very few people outside of the usual NGO expert bubble were consulted on this. And, you know, like to use a couple of I wrote an article about this during the week, and to use certainly one of the examples that I cited in the article. One of the organizations that's most responsible for rolling out this education is Worldwide Global Schools, and they list on their website the 5 guiding principles of this. The first of which is unlearning and reconstructing. And what those are, unlearning is essentially be opening the mind to critically examining and shedding ingrained biases and stereotypes that have been shaped by a person's cultural, social, and educational background. And then the second part, reconstructing, is about building new perspectives and knowledge frameworks that are more inclusive, diverse, and reflective of global realities. How does this play out in practice? Well, one of the examples that Worldwide Global Schools has on its website is in relation to migration and how sort of global citizenship education changed sort of students' perspectives on this. And they have the testimony of a teacher from a Dublin school in which he says that their students were now more aware of the benefits of migration for society, fiscal, economic, and benefits to the service sector. Said they're better educated about the hardship migrants face in traveling to Ireland and why they take such risks to seek a better life, etc., etc. They also invited a speaker from a direct provision center at the time to come in and sort of, you know, open their minds on that. I don't doubt that, you know, again, at the risk of sounding unpopular, there are, you know, undoubtedly benefits to immigration. One that I've been fairly open and talking about before is that there are many religious, in my opinion, you know, Catholic immigrants coming to Ireland who very faithfully fill the pews, and it's a very good thing. But to pretend that there are no downsides is obviously completely disingenuous. And as far as I can tell, these don't come up anywhere. So this is just a little window into how it's again, to use the phrase, it's values education, but it's they're very much kind of, again, the globalistic, UN approved and sanctioned values that so many parents across the country are increasingly taking issue with. So I think it's just important that people realize, because we have, again, and as with so many things, we have a national strategy on this. I think another one will be probably upcoming when this one runs its course this year, and next to no one knows about it. I mean, Worldwide Global Schools by 2020, if I remember correctly, had reached something like 70% of post-primary schools. So this is very prevalent, and it's just one of the sort of tools in the modern toolkit for attempting to adjust the views and values of people going through the educational system, although this is obviously much broader. It's not just schools, it's everywhere, really.
You know what really frustrates me about this as well is that we are not only teaching useless garbage, but the opportunity cost is enormous, because you think about the things that we could be teaching, which would inform people about how the world actually works. So just to give one example of many that you could give, if you went around to all the schools in Ireland and you asked school kids, not even really young kids, let's say 16 to 18, that sort of age demographic, who was Henry Kissinger? How many people do you think will be able to answer that question? Despite the fact that Henry Kissinger was an incredibly influential figure when it came to, whether you like him or hate him, I'm not endorsing Henry Kissinger here. I'm just saying, like, in terms of somebody who was very influential on the way the world looks today, foreign policy, American intervention in this or that conflict, and how that shapes the geopolitical makeup of the world.
Yeah.
I guarantee you people don't know about this stuff. And that's not because they're stupid. That's not because they've done anything wrong. It's because we've got an education system that's teaching them this garbage instead of things that would be of utility. Because you and I agree, and I'm sure everybody watching this agrees, that I want my children to be informed about how the world works. I don't want them to just have this insular, narrow view of things that are happening in their little parochial area. And that's not a good education so far as I'm concerned. So I am delighted for my kids to learn about world history, about the current affairs of how, Africa has developed and different regions and the American civil rights movement, all of that. Fine. Go, more power to you, because all of that informs the world in which they live. But I'm not convinced we're teaching that to any kind of adequate standard. I guarantee you that if you were to go to a majority of schools, even some private schools, even some schools that you would think of as very highfalutin, you'd go into a class and say, tell me about what, something very commonplace, something that you would think would be fundamental to understanding the modern world as it stands. Tell me about the fall of the Berlin Wall. Could you tell me what it was, why it came down, and in very general terms, what were the overall consequences for it? I guarantee you'd get answers. If people knew anything about it at all, they might say something like, oh yeah, wasn't that like some kind of communist thing? And that's about the most detailed kind of response you'd get. So, this is the crippling failure, I believe, of the modern education system, not just in this country, but in the whole world.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, people will always cite sort of, Irish successful educational statistics, and they're always like, oh, such and so, we have the highest educated workforce in the world. We've got one of the highest educated workforces in Europe. People are so prepared for the workplace, and it's like, well, maybe this is part of the problem. We're only educating people to fit into the modern global system, as opposed to viewing education as something that ought to be aimed at the flourishing of the human person. And I think this sort of manifests itself in really weird ways. I mean, I was struck recently, again, speak to another way in which the education system is being warped. There's obviously that Leaving Cert subject being rolled out on a sort of pilot basis, the climate action and sustainable development one, which would very much be in keeping with sort of the vision of global citizenship education. When I was reading about that, the RT had done a little feature interviewing a couple of students about the perceived importance of this subject. And it really struck me that these students, I should say, were giving propagandistic answers that you have heard time and time again from adults, from activists, from people in across every spectrum of life, that they really hadn't put any thought into. And the line in particular was, the student, so again, he was in like fourth or fifth year or something like this, was saying something along the lines of, it's really important that we learn about this and learn how to act for the sake of our grandchildren. And I was like, why is a 17-year-old saying we have to do this for the sake of our grandchildren? It's like, it's obviously, you do want to act with sort of certainly now that I'm a dad, I very much act with my children in mind. And I would like to sort of generally leave a better world behind for, my children's children, because I automatically care about them despite the fact that they don't exist. But it's really hard to put into words, but it's really weird hearing a 17-year-old justifying something by saying we have to do this for the sake of our grandchildren. It's like, it's the sort of thing you expect to hear Mary Robinson saying about the climate. It's not the sort of thing you expect to hear, again, some 17-year-old school student in Cork saying about the climate. And I can only imagine it's because it's this sort of line that's consistently regurgitated by every institution. It's like the UN, climate bodies, people who've been educated to speak in these kind of ways through things like global citizenship education. So this stuff is having an impact in terms of, subtly shifting values, I would say. And you're dead right about the sort of breakdown of the the standard of education. I mean, another way in which this strikes me is that we have a very sort of modular education system now, where, to use your example about the Berlin Wall, I don't know if it was the way in all secondary schools, certainly in my one, history was an optional subject at secondary level. Like, you only had to do it if you chose to do it. And it's like, once upon a time, you sort of, I know it worked differently in every country, but sort of broadly speaking, you received a sort of certain standard of education in absolutely crucial subjects, of which history was one. The idea that you would walk forth into the world, largely blind to these things, is just unfathomable. Whereas now it's sort of expected. It's, in fact, it's the design of the system that you're going to get a completely lopsided education. So, we're hollowing out a lot of the sort of technical and knowledge-based side of things while ramping up the sort of values and how would I put it? The push to activism side of things, which doesn't add up to anything good in my estimation.
Yeah, like and I don't want to act, by the way, like some sort of self-congratulatory elitist. Like, there's loads of books and areas I'm ignorant in that I should not be ignorant in, that, and like gaps in my knowledge from the Western canon. I've never read Dostoevsky. Everybody always talks about Dostoevsky and how ingenious he was, and I'm willing to believe that because smart people say, I don't know, I've never read it. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So, and I should, and I probably will get around to it at some stage, but this is not me saying, look how much I know and Jason knows and we're such geniuses and aren't people today such idiots. I feel like I was done an injustice in some ways by the education system. Like, I feel like I probably am a little bit better versed in these things than some people, but definitely not to the standard I would like to be and that I should be, had the school system gone through some of these crucial elements. Like, I mean, typically you'll do a Shakespeare play, which is fine, and that's a good thing. I would give credit for that. I feel like that's almost insufficient. You should do a lot of Shakespeare for English class instead of some stupid modern author. Half of this stuff is anything modern I dislike, basically, which sounds like kind of a Luddite, ignorant mindset. But who was it? Was it Ho Chi Minh who said, I don't know how I feel about the French Revolution because it hasn't been long enough yet, or like we need more time to assess its impact, or something like that. I could be butchering that. Maybe it wasn't even him. I might even be misattributing the quote, but I think it was him who said it. And I think there's an element of truth to that. Like, I don't want to consider your book a classic until it's been widely circulated for like at least a couple of 100 years. And if people are still talking about it in the year 2200, then we can say, okay, there was probably something to this and we can probably lend some credence to it. So I think his poetry is good. I'm not criticizing him, but even somebody like Seamus Heaney, I feel like should not be in the kind of main corpus of work yet. Maybe one day, but not yet. I think that it should be steeped in something with a little bit more historicity than that.
I think, yeah, it's a matter of categorization as well. I think absolutely whenever you're dealing with anything sort of, yeah, as I say, in the realm of classics, there's a lot of truth to that, to the idea that, the reason a lot of things are around for so long is because they've stood the test of time and they're sort of perennially relevant. I mean, the archetypes of this, like the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were so universally understood by so many for so long, and now are only read by, whatever handful of students happen to do classics in the handful of schools that offer classics still. It's a say, you and I are both Catholic. I would have long said that, whether or not you're even religious, a basic understanding of the Bible would open up the Western and a better understanding of the Western world to so many people. But it's something like I came out of still fairly ignorant of it. I mean, I'm much more familiar with it now than I was, but I think that both you and I, and probably everyone of our generation, and probably a couple of generations ahead of us, has been impacted by falling educational standards. And obviously, the way this ties back to what we're talking about is that this clearly is a problem that is nowhere near the educationalists' radar at the moment. In fact, they think that we're heading in the right direction, and that what's more so required isn't focus on, things that have stood the test of time, but uh, wrong-headed values that take our eyes out of our sort of immediate surroundings. And again, I'm not advocating for sort of being some, Luddite who, sort of is happy to just sit in his own patch of the field and worry about his own problems. Do think a sort of broader awareness of the world is important, but it's kind of like we mentioned on last week's podcast, which is that, you know, uh, making the world's problems your own only does so much good because you can't do anything about the vast majority of those. Much better for you to be given faithful, time proven tools and knowledge that will enable you to be an effective and competent and hopefully well-rounded human and agent to go out into the world and actually make a proper difference. I can't help but think that a lot of this is just, essentially activists who've gotten themselves into education and decided they want to breed an army of activists in their own image. And yeah, I tell you what, I am worried for, if I didn't trust in God anyway, I'd certainly be worried for the shape of society like 50 years now with a quality of education like this currently. You kind of do wonder how any of the, staples like power, law and order are going to run when this is the sort of stuff that's been filling our heads.
Yeah, definitely. And if we want to talk a little bit more about the influence of activism, we might transition to a story that I had covered recently regarding our beloved An Garda Síochana and the fact that in one of their recent reports, they had a reference to the fact that all Gardaí now are doing unconscious bias training. And as we all know, again, I think on a previous episode, I did a recap or an explainer on what unconscious bias is. And I saw a couple of comments saying, why is Ben treating us like idiots or talking down to us like we all know this? I know we all know this. I'm this for the benefit of like the one person out of the thousands who's watching who might be unfamiliar, who just stumbled. They fell asleep with their YouTube playlist just running, and they woke up and they're like, "What the hell is this?" And they don't know what's going on.
Even for the benefit of me in my doped up state.
Yeah, exactly. Jason is coming down off the fentanyl. His memory isn't what it used to be, So we need to. The Neatosians have gotten straight to his brainstem. And,
absolutely. Every mental function for me is unconscious currently.
So, in a nutshell, essentially what unconscious bias means is that you have underlying racism, sexism, homophobia, and you might not even be aware of it. That's why it's unconscious. And so even if you think of yourself as I'm not a racist person, I treat everybody equally. Actually, there are subtle ways in which you will discriminate against people, and you need to be re-educated. You need a special course or deprogramming to de-racistify yourself. And even then, you probably won't fully get rid of it. You can just sort of mitigate it a bit because racism is in your DNA effectively because of cultural factors and blah blah blah. This is the kind of garbage they say. It's insulting. It's totally pseudoscientific and unproven, and it's extremely widespread and prolific. It's basically ubiquitous now in most corporate settings, different government departments and so on. And now it's found its way into the Gardaí. So I found this highly interesting, and when you think about it, I asked the deputy Garda commissioner about this about a month ago at a press conference. This is Shauna Coxon, who some of you might be familiar with, who was the Canadian import, who is now the number 2 person underneath Drew Harris. She was a cop in Canada. Now she is the second most senior person in An Garda Síochana. Total Canadian accent. No connection to Ireland that I'm aware of. And so I asked her, I said, is this not effectively accusing all Gardaí of being a pack of racists? Is that not the clear implication here? And she said, no, that's not the intention. It's actually just saying that there is a general organizational and institutional problem with these things. It's about a systemic failure that we need to address more broadly. But the problem with that is you now have, if I was to take that seriously and agree with her and say, okay, let's assume that's right, you're telling me that the Gardaí are institutionally biased as an organization. So I would have thought that was kind of a big deal. That's kind of a bombshell admission to make. That are you telling me that the entire Gardaí are racist, or that they have racism built into their systems? Hold on, just 1 second. I won't even cut this out. I'm just going to plug in my laptop because it's about to die. It's grossly unprofessional. So my apologies to our viewers, but I didn't want to look like
This is the gritty behind the scenes stuff they come for.
Absolutely. It's always funny to me when people say, oh, those Gript, they must be getting like dark money from here or there. And I'm like, listen, I think if we had dark money, we'd have a better setup than this, frankly. But
at the very least, you'd have someone standing there ready to plug in your laptop for you.
Yeah, exactly. I'd have like an intern and or slave to do that kind of work. But unfortunately, so regardless, the point is, I asked to gain access to this material, this anti-bias material that the Gardaí are using, and they refused. They said, oh no, it's of an operational nature. So they gave me a kind of a brief summary of what's in it, but they said you can't have it. So that's clearly a nonsense answer, because I understand the Gardaí will deny you stuff for operational purposes. Like if you say to the Gardaí, give me all the information you have about Mexican drug cartels operating in Ireland, they're obviously going to tell you to piss off, and quite rightly, because that could blow current investigations that they're doing, or if you say, how do you go about tracking terrorists? They're not going to tell you that, because then if you're a terrorist, you'll find out their methods and you'll try to get around it. So there's certain things that the Gardaí won't tell you and they shouldn't tell you, and that's perfectly right and reasonable. This is absolutely in the public interest and is not of a security nature in any way, shape, or form. It's literally just telling Gardaí how not to be offensive to people or how to check their own biases. First of all, the public have a right to know what the Gardaí are being taught about their own bias. And second of all, it has no security implications whatsoever. So that's clearly a garbage answer. They're embarrassed about the material that's inside the course, and they don't want it to be scrutinized by an outlet like Gript. That's obviously what's going on here. So anyway, I'm not done with this. I will be pursuing it through, whatever means are available to me. I'll see what the methodology is that I can use here, FOIing it and taking it to the Information Commission or whatever else needs to be done. But yeah, no, I thought that was really a remarkable response from them.
Yeah, it is funny, and I mean, I'm reluctant to use, to put it this way, the other side's tactics in different ways, because I feel like it only sort of reinforces that worldview. But this would be an occasion in which you could validly say at a press conference with them that you, as a half Jamaican man, feel very uncomfortable knowing that the police force is sort of institutionally biased and racist, I should say, or systemically biased and racist, and you would really like to know what's being done to, sort of specifically what's being done to undo that. I feel like that might put them on the spot nicely. But it is an interesting one, and the fact that this stuff is lingering around like a bad smell, unconscious bias. Like, I think we've probably mentioned it before. I certainly mentioned it in an article before that a couple of years ago, the UK threw it out for its civil servants because it was so sort of scientifically unfounded. So naturally, we're a couple of years behind the curve on this one, and poor Gardaí. We should probably put out a call saying if there are any Gardaí who feel like divulging what they've been subjected to in relation to this anonymously, you'd probably love to hear from them. But it's a.
I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna. I'm gonna leave. I'm trying to think of what's the most kind of cryptic way to convey my views on this that I can. You know what? I'll just say it would be very interesting to see what's in the course. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, no, nice way to put it. But yeah, suffice to say that the Gardaíers are focusing on, well, at least that the Garda management are focusing on this, while obviously law and order remains a massive concern for much of the population, isn't overly reassuring.
Yeah, not particularly. And you know the other thing is, and I don't think she intentionally misled me, by the way, but Shauna Coxon, while I was asking her about this, it was so the Guardian released this report. I forget exactly the name of the report, but it was some new report that they put out like a month ago. So the Guardian were having a press conference to answer questions about the report explicitly. In the press release they put out, they said, here, this is a Q&A. The media can come and ask us questions to the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, and we'll answer whatever queries you have. So I asked her about this, and she was like, I have no idea why that's in the report. You'd have to go and talk to the Future of Media Commission, because they're the ones who put it in there.
Or the Future Police
recommended.
Commission, probably.
Sorry, what did I say? The Future Media?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. Yeah, you're right. I meant the Future of Policing Commission. They're the ones who recommended it go in there, so go and talk to them. I have no idea. And then I went and checked with the Future of Policing Commission report, and it makes no reference to it whatsoever. Now, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm wrong. I searched everywhere I could, and I subsequently emailed the Gardaí, and I said, can you explain this apparent discrepancy? She said it's there. I looked, it's not there. Am I missing something? And they just never got back to me. So actually, I ended up chasing the material for 3 weeks. I emailed them every couple of days for like I think I sent them like 6 or 7 emails saying, hey, any update on this? Do you have it? And they weren't responding. Just they kept me in a holding pattern. They kept saying, yeah, listen, it's coming. Hold your horses, relax. You know, we'll come back to you when we have something. And then I'd let like 3 days go past, and I'd say, hey, any update here? No explanation as to why it was taking so long. They were just kept like fobbing me off. So finally I gave them an ultimatum, and I said, look, tomorrow I'm going to publish a piece saying that the Gardaí refused to give this to me. If you want to give it to me before then, or a good explanation, then feel free, but that's what I'm doing. And so at that point, they came back and said, oh, we can't release it for operational reasons. So I sent them a follow-up email, and I said, you know, would you like to explain the deputy commissioner's discrepancy? And I gave them a deadline of 1 hour. I said, in the next hour, if you have a response, I'll include it. And they came back and they said, we can't get it in that time frame, and it's unreasonable to ask for a 1 hour response. Like that's, and I didn't respond, but I was tempted to respond. You know what's unreasonable is making me wait 3 weeks for materials that you're in possession of, only to tell me that you can't release it for operational reasons. That's pretty unreasonable. I think most people would agree. So pardon me for asking for a 1 hour time frame. If you want more reasonable time frames, maybe you know, we can have some give and take here, and we can play ball. I'd be in a much more cooperative headspace if you guys were willing to meet me halfway on some of this stuff. So anyway, this is the joys of working with the press offices of certain institutions of the state.
Yeah, the trials and tribulations. And then, yeah, if you lose your temper with them and send a snarky email like that, yeah, it only makes it easier for them to come back and say something like, now look how unreasonable you're being. But no, you're right, it's extraordinarily difficult. And I've spoken before, I think myself and Gary spoke about it on one of the live streams, about how like obfuscation, stonewalling, otherwise delaying are tactics that are very hard to quantify in any sort of, you know, complaint against transparency in Ireland. But my God, once you start doing this work, you realize that these are the tools of the trade, and they're implemented very effectively by many, many bodies in the country. And they go a long way towards sort of clouding our image of what's actually going on in the country. So it's a thankless work, and a lot of the time it doesn't actually lead to anything, but it has to be done. The more people doing it, the better.
Definitely. Yeah. It should be like the scene in 300 with the arrows raining down. Like, I want to do that, but with FOIs. Just like block. blocking out the sun. They're just raining down on them from all directions. That's the way to get anything. With that said, we might briefly run over to America and just touch on Elon Musk and his plan. No, not plan. I mean, he's already got it in motion, registering a new political party in the US, the America Party, which is supposed to obviously rival the Republicans and the Democrats. And before we criticize it, which I am going to criticize it, unfortunately, is I might give it some credence in the sense that because of America's voting system and the fact that it is a two-party state, or some people would say a one-party state because they're so similar in so many respects, you do get a lot of people who hate the Republicans but vote for them because they don't think there's any better option, or they hate the Democrats but they vote for them because they don't think there's any option, or they're voting against the other party because they think they're worse. And I mean, I pulled it up here in research for this, how the only third party candidate in kind of modern recent history who did any kind of significant numbers during a presidential election was Ross Perot in 1992, who got 18% of the vote. So not bad, but he still came third and was overtaken by George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, who won that year. So still just nowhere near enough to do anything substantial. He got about half of the result of the Republicans. So, and that was a freak anomaly. We've never seen anything like that since. So I think there are people who vote for, even if you said, yeah, I like the Libertarians, or I like the Green Party, or I like the whatever weirdo party has come out of the woodwork, and I think they'd be a better fit for government, you just know they're not going to get in, so why waste your vote? So you default to the two big ones. So I think I understand the impulse for somebody with a lot of resources and a lot of fame and a lot of influence to say, maybe I can use my power to break that system and do a great service to the country. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the impulse as well, even if I think it's sort of poorly founded. And to clarify, why we're talking about this, because I think there's a reasonable criticism a lot of the time that just too much of the Western world discussion is centered on America, but it's like some amount of it has to be indulged in because it's just the world we live in. What happens in America affects the rest of the world, and we're seeing that firsthand with these turbulent times that we're living through, certainly economically. But that out of the way, yeah, I mean, to comment on it, I think Elon is very quickly going to find that it's much easier to work with the laws of physics than it is, and I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier to work with the laws of physics than it is to work with people. I mean, I'm very surprised that he would decide to continue wading into politics after, from his perspective, his foray into politics with Trump turned out to be such a disaster for him. I mean, Trump got a lot out of it. I'm not sure how much Elon ultimately got out of it. So why he's deciding to do this is a puzzle to me. And I mean, he's such an enigma in some regards because he's clearly an intensely clever guy. I mean, you don't do all of the things he's done without being extraordinarily intelligent along some metric anyway. And then at the same time, it's coupled to like political views that, I don't know, some of which I probably would have held when I was in secondary school or something like this. And then many people often refer to as sort of like high school or, school sort of views of politics. And, he seems to make a lot of decisions now in a completely erratic way by running polls on X. And, he obviously has much more access to sort of the data behind the scenes at X than we do. But if I remember correctly, he ran a poll on this saying, if I did this political party thing, do people think there's a need for it? And he sort of makes, as he has done in the past, he has made decisions off the basis of the results of these polls. But who's to say you don't have, like, I don't know, the vast majority of people responding from India, from Africa, from Europe, from all of these different places? It's a completely erratic decision-making process. And, here more than anywhere, it just speaks of someone who has sort of more money and more sort of energy than they necessarily do sense.
I just think that like one of the problems with modern politics that people have pointed to is that it's very polarized, and my understanding of the kind of platform that this party is going to have is that it's going to be a little bit sort of nuanced, because Elon has now been pigeonholed as some kind of far right lunatic, which is totally absurd, by the way. I'm not saying that's what he is or that that's a correct view, but that's how he is being perceived and portrayed by the mainstream media. Like if you ask Fintan O'Toole for the symbol of far right lunacy in the world, he's going to tell you it's somebody like Elon Musk. That's stupid, but that's the way they think. But Elon is not only not far right, he's not even conservative. And I don't say that as an insult. I don't even think he would identify as conservative. Like this is a guy who, just based on his family dynamic and his multiple children by multiple different women by design, he's clearly not particularly hung up on the institution of marriage. I don't know his views on abortion, but I don't believe it's particularly like he'd be pro-life or anything. He very openly and happily allows the proliferation of pornography on his platform. Again,
another major one is transhumanist views, like these ideas that obviously ultimately, technology ought to be merging with humanity and, resulting in something else, whatever that may be. That's an inherently unconservative position.
Totally. So he's got all of those views, which aren't right-wing. But then, of course, he's got all these views that wouldn't adhere to the left either. He's clearly opposed to massive, open borders, illegal immigration. Like, I think he's got some nuance there with the H-1B visas and things like that. But he doesn't subscribe to the Democrat model of immigration, at least. He's not into insane, rampant government spending and climate hysteria. Like, he believes in climate change and he thinks something should be done, but he wants it to be more sensible and blah, blah, blah. So he doesn't clearly adhere to either category of the political divide. And some people, including himself, might think that that's an advantage. I feel like that's a disadvantage. And I was actually speaking to Pater Tabine about this recently. Pater was saying how basically he thinks it's a bad thing that you can usually, with a high degree of accuracy, tell someone's entire political platform based on one view. So if you learn that somebody is pro-life, you can be pretty sure that they are also opposed to mass immigration, that they are also opposed to transgender ideology, yada, 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 going down the list. And similarly, if you hear that somebody is like big on, I don't know, Palestine, you can probably guess their views on a whole bunch of other issues as well. And Pater was saying he thinks this is a bad thing because people should consider each argument on its own merit, and that you could be, there's no reason why you couldn't be pro-life and pro-mass immigration, just to give an example. He didn't give that example. I'm giving that example. I don't want people to think that Pater is in favor of mass immigration. I'm not saying that, but you understand what I'm saying. So I understand that argument, and I get that, it's obviously you want to think through all of your beliefs and not just inherit a set of beliefs because of some tribe that you belong to. But at the same time, the reason conservatives believe the thing they do in such a uniform way, or liberals, is because they have an underlying philosophy, whether they've consciously thought it through or not, which informs all of their views. And it has a kind of a trickle-down effect, which gives you a kind of an all-encompassing worldview. And the same goes for liberals, and the same goes for everybody. So, anyway, just bringing it back to the Elon thing, I feel like some kind of weirdo mishmash party that's got like some right-wing beliefs and some left-wing beliefs, and it's a bit libertarian, but then it also wants state subsidies for this, and I don't know that there's any market for that. Maybe there should be. I'm not, that's a matter of personal opinion. I don't know what the merits of that are, but I don't feel like people think that way. I don't think that that's going to appeal to anyone, frankly, at this point in human history.
No, and I mean, definitely not during a time of clear, political polarization. I mean, who wants this kind of meh middle ground? And I mean, just to give a sense as to what its potential impact may be, I think he tweeted rather than said, or posted rather than said, that they would only be looking to get a couple of Senate seats and, contest a couple of districts, enough to give them sort of a key position on votes such that they would have to be essentially have to be won over when it came to sort of crunch votes and things like this. And it's like, I don't need. I'm sure a lot of people, 20 years ago might have said, oh, SpaceX isn't going to work or Tesla isn't going to work, and he proves them wrong. But I think the realm of politics is entirely different, and I don't think you have to be a genius or a particular prophet to say that it's not going to work out like that. Um, so this is obviously relevant because he's a big personality, and arguably got more resources at his command than anyone in human history ever had. And I just find it personally fascinating how some aspects of the world are completely unmoldable even to someone like him. It's like, you can have all the money in the world, a lot of personal power and influence, as he clearly does, you know, leading in technology, which is sort of one of the main currencies of the day. You got one of the most influential social media platforms, you know, to yourself. You're mixing with the most powerful and influential people in the entire world presently, and yet, you know, politics will probably be a bridge too far. You won't be able to overly affect that. I mean, as I say, he did. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like in the 2020 presidential race, Michael Bloomberg of the publication Bloomberg famously spent over $1 billion on his campaign, and he entirely self-financed it. He refused all campaign donations, and he did terribly. Like he bombed. He was one of the first people to be eliminated after
Yeah.
sinking $1 billion into it. So like a lot of people have this idea, and I'm not saying again, like Elon's clearly not stupid. I'm not saying that he went into this naively or something, but I think a lot of people believe, oh yeah, if you throw enough money at a problem like politics, you can be like that really is not the deciding factor at all, and you can waste a lot of money on a campaign that's going nowhere.
100%. And I think, like, across the political spectrum, people are sort of unified in their belief that he was kind of at his best when he was just sort of focusing on, yeah, like, everyone finds space interesting. Everyone is very, very much, in the same way that, like, man taking his first steps on the moon was by and large seen as very, at the very least, interesting technical achievement of man, even though I know, certainly in religious circles, some people disagreed with it. They sort of saw it as man stepping on the moon as sort of slightly disenchanting the world, to put it that way, because obviously the moon has been in the sky for as long as humans have been on Earth, and it's always been an object of poetry and praise and art and all of these things. And they thought that by putting man on the moon, it would just sort of take a little bit of the magic out of that. It would kind of make it just another place like, anywhere on Earth that had been reached. That's all just a big tangent to say that most people, I think, by and large, sort of generally got behind it, and I think a lot of people still feel the same way in relation to, human endeavors in the field of space, and no one is doing that like Elon Musk. So, I think if we sort of stuck to things like that and Tesla, which, like, I don't think people understand how much Tesla dominates the electric vehicle market. Like, I don't have the stats in front of me, but it absolutely dominates. Like, there's no competition on that front, certainly in the Western electric car market.
And
Um,
that's in the face of an actual terrorism campaign against it. Like think about how hard it is to compete in business, any business ordinarily. Like it's one of the hardest things you can do. Takes so much difficulty. Imagine not only are you trying to run a business, you've got a machine of terrorists effectively trying to ruin your business in a systematic and deliberate way, and still you are the leader in that particular industry.
yeah, I mean, I only saw my first gigafactory there a while ago, on a bus outside Berlin. That was 2 months ago or so. Like, it is I'm not a particular, like, electric vehicle or vehicle buff in general, But it is a marvel. I mean, the factory is absolutely enormous. It would take me, like, I would say, I'd guess 20, 25, 30 minutes to walk the length of it. Like, it's absolutely huge. So this stuff is genuinely very impressive and very, very interesting. As I say, I wouldn't be a particular fan of his transhumanist stuff, but I would be a fan, of like SpaceX and yeah, Tesla more broadly. But I think he's at his best when he focuses on those things, and he sort of humbly acknowledges that you can't be everything, as he sort of is trying to be. Trump, clearly, whether you like him or not, has a gift for politics. He's sort of beaten Elon, and they're vying for dominance in that particular field. And I think, it would be better for him, and probably better for the American right, to put it that way, although say he doesn't necessarily see himself as belonging to that, to leave it there. But who knows? The world is a complicated place. Who knows how it'll play out? But it's certainly one to keep an eye on, because, as I said at the beginning, what happens over there certainly matters in Europe, and indeed in Ireland, and very much so at the moment, with Ireland being a bit of a crucible for so many global interests, particularly with, like, so many tech HQs centered there, and important organizations like Comisiún na Meán that play a pretty key role in European censorship and things like that. So it is worth keeping an eye on, even if we're a little bit America fatigued at this stage.
Yeah, to quote the rapper 50 Cent in the song Back Down, he said, "You can buy cars, but you can't buy respect in the hood." And that's wise words for these times. Briefly before we finish, I might just throw in there that, as we know, America used to have a multiplicity of parties when it was founded as a state, and the Democrats and Republicans are the modern two-party system, but they used to have a variety of groups, and there actually used to be a Democratic Republican Party. That was a party which existed, which is, that thing in The Simpsons where it's like, I'm in pursuit of commie Nazis. It kind of gave that sort of a vibe. But so with that said, we will catch you all next week for another fantastic episode of the Long Game Podcast. God bless.
God bless.